The cabin, once quiet and serene, now felt like a battleground between his grief and the future Eleanor had entrusted to him. He spent the days cleaning the house, organizing the belongings she had left behind, and trying to imagine what his next steps would be. But just as Oliver was beginning to settle into the idea that this cabin was his, the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway shattered the silence. Oliver glanced out the window and his stomach tightened. Thomas and Lydia, Eleanor's children, had arrived. The sight of their expensive sedan, polished and pristine, was a jarring contrast to the humble cabin. He had never met them face to face, but Eleanor had spoken of them often, her children who lived in the city, who had always pushed her to sell the cabin and move into something more suitable. Oliver's heart raced. He knew this moment was inevitable, but he hadn't expected it to come so soon. The door to the cabin burst open before he could prepare himself. "What the hell is going on here?" Thomas's voice boomed as he stepped into the room, his eyes immediately locking onto Oliver. Behind him, Lydia hovered, her arms crossed and her face contorted in a mix of shock and anger. "What do you think you're doing here?" Oliver stood up, trying to maintain his composure. He had known this confrontation would come, but the intensity of their anger caught him off guard. He took a deep breath. "Eleanor wanted me to have the cabin," he said, his voice calm but firm. "She told me before she passed away." Both siblings stared at him in disbelief, their faces darkening with fury. Lydia was the first to speak. "That's ridiculous," she spat, her voice laced with contempt. "Why would she leave this place to you? You're just a—" She stopped short, but Oliver knew what she was about to say. She didn't need to finish the sentence for him to understand how they saw him. Just a homeless man, someone beneath them, someone unworthy of their mother's legacy. "I'm telling you the truth," Oliver said, trying to keep his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. "Eleanor told me herself. She wanted me to have this cabin. It was her last wish." Thomas's face twisted with rage. "That's a lie," he snapped, stepping closer to Oliver, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're a liar and a thief." Oliver's stomach churned, but he held his ground. "I'm not lying. I have no reason to." "Of course you do," Lydia interjected, her voice sharp. "You're trying to take advantage of our mother's kindness. She may have been too soft to see it, but we're not. We're not going to let you squat here and steal what belongs to us." Before Oliver could respond, Thomas pulled out his phone and began dialing. "We'll let the police decide," he said coldly. "You've got no right to be here." Oliver felt a wave of panic surge through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had no legal documents, no will to prove what Eleanor had told him. It was all based on trust that her children clearly didn't share. He knew this wasn't going to end well, but he had no choice but to wait for the authorities. Within minutes, a police car pulled up to the cabin. Two officers, a man and a woman, stepped out, their expressions unreadable as they approached the front porch. Thomas and Lydia rushed out to meet them, filling the air with accusations and demands. "He's trespassing," Thomas said, pointing an accusing finger at Oliver. "He's been living here without permission, and now he's claiming that our mother left him the property." The officers turned to Oliver, their eyes calm but questioning. "Do you have any proof of ownership?" the female officer asked, her tone measured but firm. Oliver swallowed hard. "I don't have any documents," he admitted. "But Eleanor told me. She told me before she died that the cabin was mine." The male officer raised an eyebrow. "Without any legal documentation, I'm afraid we have to ask you to leave the property," he said. Oliver's heart sank. He had known this would happen, but hearing it out loud made the reality even harsher. "But there's nothing we can do," the female officer added, her voice softening. "If there's no will or legal transfer of property, the family has the right to ask you to leave." Lydia crossed her arms, a smug smile playing on her lips. "You heard them," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Get out." Oliver felt his chest tighten as the officers stepped toward him. He wanted to fight, to argue, to explain, but what could he say? There was no paper trail, no proof, nothing but the memory of Eleanor's whispered words. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, not out of anger, but out of sheer frustration. Eleanor had trusted him, and now her children were erasing that trust with a single phone call. "I'll go," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But this isn't over," Thomas scoffed, rolling his eyes. "It's over," he said. "You don't belong here." "You never did." Oliver turned toward the door, his heart heavy with grief and shame. As he stepped outside, he glanced back one last time at the cabin, the place that had felt like a refuge, a gift from Eleanor. Now it felt like a distant memory, slipping away with each step he took. He could feel their eyes on him, watching as he was escorted off the property, their judgment burning into his back. But deep inside, something shifted. He had lost the battle, but not the war. Eleanor had trusted him, and she had left him with something far more powerful than her children realized. That night, Oliver sat in his small corner of the city shelter, staring at the old, faded leather suitcase that now held everything Eleanor had left him. Inside were the bundles of money, $500,000, the secret inheritance that Eleanor had hidden away for him. It was enough to change his life, enough to fight back against the injustice her children had thrown at him. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed help, someone who could stand up to the legal challenges, someone who could make Eleanor's wishes heard. The next morning, Oliver set out to find a lawyer. He wasn't a man of the law, but he had heard stories of lawyers who took on cases like his, people who believed in justice, who fought for the underdog. And now, with Eleanor's money tucked safely away, he had the means to fight back. After hours of searching and asking around, Oliver finally found someone, a lawyer by the name of Henry Brooks, a man with a reputation for taking on tough cases. He wasn't flashy, and his office wasn't in the best part of town, but Oliver didn't care. He just needed someone who would listen. As he stepped into the lawyer's small office, Oliver felt a renewed sense of determination. He wasn't just fighting for himself now. He was fighting for Eleanor, for the trust she had placed in him, and he wouldn't let her down. Henry listened carefully as Oliver told him the story about Eleanor, about the cabin, and about the money she had left behind. The lawyer nodded thoughtfully, scribbling notes as Oliver spoke, his eyes narrowing with interest. "You don't have a will or any documentation to prove she left you the cabin," Henry said slowly, tapping his pen on the desk. "That's going to make things difficult." Oliver nodded, his heart sinking. "I know," he said quietly. "But she told me it was her last wish." Henry leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on Oliver. "You've got a tough road ahead of you," he admitted. "But you've got something they don't." Oliver raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" The lawyer smiled faintly. "You've got $500,000. That can buy you a lot of justice." Oliver felt a flicker of hope ignite in his chest. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As he left the office, he knew that Eleanor's children might have won the first round. But with Henry's help, he was determined to win the war. After days of reflection and conversations with Henry Brooks, Oliver knew he had only one option left. He would use the inheritance Eleanor had secretly left him to regain what was rightfully his. Henry had listened to his story with the patience of someone who had seen many injustices in his career, and together they had devised a plan that was as clever as it was poetic. Oliver couldn't fight Eleanor's children head-on. Without a will or legal documentation, it was a losing battle. But what the children didn't know was that Oliver now had the means to turn the tables, and it was money that had come from their own mother's hidden savings. This wasn't just about reclaiming the cabin. This was about fulfilling Eleanor's last wish, and Oliver was determined to see it through. Henry, ever the strategic thinker, had a brilliant idea. Instead of engaging in a long and expensive legal fight, they would let the children believe they were getting exactly what they wanted, a quick sale of the cabin. Oliver would buy it back, using Eleanor's money, but the transaction would take place under Henry's name. The children, thinking they were rid of Oliver for good, would never suspect the truth until it was too late. "They'll never see it coming," Henry said with a grin, tapping his pen on the desk as they reviewed the details. "All we have to do is bait the hook." Oliver hesitated for a moment. He had never been involved in anything so tactical. But Henry was confident, and Oliver trusted him. This was the only way to ensure that Eleanor's wishes were respected without a drawn-out courtroom battle. "Do you think they'll sell?" Oliver asked, still unsure of how things would play out. "They'll sell," Henry said, his eyes gleaming with confidence. "From what you've told me, they don't care about the cabin. They just want the money." Oliver nodded, though his heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the beginning of the end. All he had to do now was wait. It didn't take long for Henry to make contact with Thomas and Lydia. Posing as a potential buyer interested in purchasing a vacation home, Henry reached out with a proposition that was sure to catch their attention. A week later, Thomas and Lydia sat in Henry's modest office, their faces filled with anticipation. They had spent the past few days searching for buyers, but none had made offers that were even close to what they were hoping for. They wanted a quick sale, and the market had been less than kind to them. But when Henry Brooks called and expressed interest in purchasing the cabin, they jumped at the opportunity. Henry sat across from them, the air in the room thick with tension. He had already laid the groundwork in their previous conversations, expressing just the right amount of interest without seeming too eager. Now it was time to seal the deal. "So let me get this straight," Thomas said, leaning forward. "You're offering $92,000 for the cabin." "In cash." Henry nodded. "That's correct. I'm looking for a quiet vacation home to escape to on the weekends. The cabin seems perfect for that. I'm prepared to make the payment as soon as we sign the paperwork." Lydia exchanged a glance with her brother, a greedy glint in her eyes. $92,000 in cash was more than they had hoped for, and the thought of walking away with that much money was too tempting to pass up. "There's another buyer interested," Thomas said, trying to sound shrewd. "But we're leaning towards your offer. We want to close this deal quickly." Henry raised an eyebrow but didn't flinch. He had been prepared for this bluff. "I understand," he said coolly. "But my offer is firm. $92,000 in cash, and the deal closes as soon as we sign." There was a brief silence as the siblings considered their options. The idea of holding out for a better offer crossed their minds, but in the end, they were too eager for a quick payday. They didn't want to risk losing this deal over a few $1,000s. Lydia smiled. "We accept." The following week, Thomas and Lydia arrived at the cabin to finalize the sale. They had already cleared out most of Eleanor's belongings, leaving behind only a few pieces of furniture that neither of them wanted. The cabin, which had once been filled with warmth and memories, now felt like an empty shell, a place they had no attachment to. Henry pulled up in a sleek black sedan, dressed in a sharp suit that gave him an air of authority. He stepped out of the car, carrying a small leather briefcase in one hand. The siblings watched as he approached, their eyes fixed on the briefcase that they knew was filled with cash. "Shall we?" Henry asked, gesturing toward the porch where the paperwork awaited. Thomas and Lydia exchanged excited looks, their greed barely concealed. They followed Henry to the porch, where the documents were spread out on the table. Henry placed the briefcase on the ground beside him and opened it, revealing the neatly stacked bundles of cash. "Here's your payment," Henry said, watching as Thomas's eyes widened at the sight of the money. "As promised." Thomas counted the bundles quickly, his hands trembling slightly. "It's all here," he said, glancing up at his sister, who grinned with satisfaction. Henry slid the paperwork across the table. "Sign here, and the cabin is officially mine." Thomas and Lydia didn't hesitate. They grabbed the pens and scrawled their signatures on the dotted lines, eager to be done with it. They had no idea what was coming next. As the last signature was added, Henry sat back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Congratulations," he said, his voice smooth. "The sale is complete, but before you go, there's something you should know." The siblings paused, their expressions turning wary. "What do you mean?" Lydia asked. Henry stood, closing the briefcase and placing it neatly at his side. He looked at them with calm amusement, his eyes glinting with the knowledge of what was about to unfold. "You see, this isn't my vacation home," he said, his voice casual. "I was simply acting as a representative." Thomas furrowed his brow, confusion spreading across his face. "A representative? For who?" Henry's smile widened as he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "For the true owner of this cabin," he said, handing the envelope to Thomas. "Someone you're already familiar with." Lydia's face twisted in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Just then, the door to the sedan opened, and Oliver stepped out, dressed in clean clothes, his posture straighter than it had been in months. He walked up to the porch, stopping just in front of the siblings, who were now staring at him in disbelief. "This is your buyer," Henry said, his voice filled with satisfaction. "Oliver." Thomas and Lydia's jaws dropped, the color draining from their faces as the realization hit them. The money they had just eagerly accepted had come from their own mother's hidden fortune. The same fortune she had left for Oliver. They had unknowingly sold the cabin to the very man they had tried to keep away. "You?" Thomas sputtered, his face turning red with anger. "You bought the cabin?" Oliver nodded, his gaze steady. "Eleanor wanted me to have it, and now I do." Lydia's hands clenched into fists, her expression a mix of shock and rage. "This isn't possible, you tricked us." "No one tricked you," Henry said calmly, standing beside Oliver. "You sold the cabin willingly, and now it belongs to its rightful owner." Thomas and Lydia were speechless, their faces twisted in anger and frustration. They had thought they could get rid of Oliver, that they could erase their mother's wishes and take the cabin for themselves. But now, standing in front of the man they had tried to cast aside, they realized how badly they had underestimated him. "You didn't know your mother as well as you thought," Oliver said softly, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "She trusted me, and I promised her that I'd take care of this place. Now I will." With that, Henry handed Oliver the keys to the cabin. "It's yours, Oliver, all of it." Thomas and Lydia stared at him, their faces pale and defeated. They had lost not just the cabin, but the moral high ground. Their mother's true wishes had been fulfilled, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. As they stormed off the porch, muttering under their breath, Oliver stood tall, the weight of the moment settling over him. He had done it. He had honored Eleanor's last wish, and now the cabin was truly home. The tension hung thick in the air as Oliver stepped out of the sleek black sedan, the polished leather of his shoes crunching softly against the gravel driveway. Gone was the weary, downtrodden figure of the man Eleanor's children had once dismissed as nothing more than a vagrant. Today, Oliver stood before them transformed, a man with purpose, dressed in a tailored suit, exuding quiet confidence. For a moment, Thomas and Lydia stood frozen, their faces etched with disbelief as they struggled to reconcile the image of this poised man with the one they had scorned so easily just days before. This wasn't the Oliver they had sneered at when they called the police to have him thrown off the property. This wasn't the man they had thought they'd banished from their mother's legacy. This was someone else entirely. A man now standing in control of everything they thought they had rightfully taken. "I'm the owner of this cabin," Oliver said, his voice steady, his words a thunderclap that shattered the silence. "Everything your mother left me, including the money, is mine. You never knew her true wishes." For a moment the siblings said nothing. They simply stared, their expressions flickering between shock and rage. Thomas's mouth opened, but no words came out. Lydia's hands clenched at her sides, her face pale with fury. "How?" Lydia finally spat, her voice shaking with indignation. "How is this even possible?" Oliver locked eyes with her, the calm determination in his gaze unwavering. "Your mother trusted me," he said softly, but his words cut like a blade. "More than she trusted her own children. She left this cabin to me because she knew I'd care for it the way she and your father did. She wanted this place to mean something more than just money." Thomas's face darkened, his fists tightening as he stepped forward, but Lydia grabbed his arm, holding him back. "This isn't over," she hissed under her breath. But even as her words echoed in the air, the truth was undeniable. They had signed the papers. They had accepted the cash. They had legally transferred ownership of the cabin to Oliver. Their mother's true wishes had been fulfilled right under their noses. Thomas was the first to break the silence, his voice laced with barely contained rage. "This is some kind of trick," he snarled, stepping forward, eyes blazing. "You conned us." "No," Henry interjected, stepping between Oliver and the siblings, his professional demeanor never faltering. "There was no con. You sold the property willingly. You signed the papers without hesitation. Everything was legal and above board." "You took advantage of us," Lydia snapped, her voice rising with anger. "This wasn't fair. We didn't know who you were." Henry raised an eyebrow. "You didn't ask. All you cared about was getting the money. And you got it." Oliver remained silent, letting Henry handle the storm of accusations. He didn't need to argue. The truth had already been revealed, and the children's anger only further highlighted how little they had cared about their mother's wishes. "You didn't know your mother at all," Oliver finally said, his voice low but clear. "You were too busy trying to sell the one thing she cherished the most. You didn't even listen when she told you what she wanted." Lydia's face twisted in fury, but her words died on her lips as the weight of what Oliver said began to sink in. She had always seen the cabin as nothing more than a financial asset, a relic of the past that could be turned into quick cash. She had never thought to ask her mother why she had stayed there so long, why she had refused to sell despite the constant pressure. And now, the truth was staring her in the face. Her mother had trusted this man, this stranger, more than she had ever trusted her own children. Thomas, ever the practical one, tried to regain his composure. He took a deep breath, though his eyes still burned with anger. "Fine," he said, his voice tight. "You've got the cabin. You tricked us into selling it, but don't think for a second that this is over." Oliver met his gaze evenly. "It is over, Thomas. The cabin is mine, and everything inside it, including the money your mother saved, is mine too. You signed the papers. You made the deal. You can't take it back." Thomas's face flushed with anger, but before he could speak, Oliver added, "You're going to need that money. Use it wisely. You'll need a good lawyer for the lawsuit you filed against me." Lydia's eyes widened, the full weight of Oliver's words hitting her like a freight train. "Lawsuit?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. Oliver nodded, his expression hardening. "You pressed charges against me for trespassing. But now that I own the property, that lawsuit is meaningless. And when we meet in court, I'll be the one in control." The siblings exchanged panicked glances, their anger now mingling with a growing sense of dread. They had thought they were so clever, so sure of themselves when they had called the police on Oliver. But now the tables had turned, and they were the ones standing on shaky ground. Thomas clenched his jaw, his fists trembling with barely contained rage. But there was nothing left to say. He knew they had lost. "Let's go," he muttered, turning away from the porch, his movements stiff with humiliation. Lydia hesitated, her gaze lingering on Oliver, but the fight had gone out of her. She shook her head, disbelief still etched across her face. Without another word, she followed her brother, the weight of their defeat heavy in every step they took toward their car. Oliver watched them go, his heart pounding in his chest. For so long he had been the one at the mercy of others. Cast aside, looked down upon, treated as though his life held no value. But today he stood tall. Today he had honored Eleanor's memory and proven to her children that their mother's trust in him had not been misplaced. Henry placed a hand on Oliver's shoulder, breaking the silence. "You did it," he said quietly. "It's yours now." Oliver nodded, his gaze still fixed on the retreating figures of Thomas and Lydia. "It's not about the money," he said softly. "It never was. This was about keeping a promise." Henry smiled. "I think Eleanor would be proud." As the siblings drove away, their car disappearing down the long, winding road, Oliver let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The weight of everything, the cabin, the money, the lawsuit, seemed to lift slightly from his shoulders. He had won. Not just the legal battle, but the battle for his dignity, for Eleanor's legacy, and for the life she had believed he deserved. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, Oliver stood on the porch of the cabin, looking out at the land that had once been Robert and Eleanor's sanctuary. It was quiet now, the air filled with the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. This place, once filled with memories of Eleanor's past, was now his to care for. But this wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of friendship, trust, and the bond that had formed between two people from very different worlds. Eleanor had given him more than a home. She had given him a chance to rebuild his life, to start over with dignity and purpose. As Oliver locked the cabin door behind him and turned out the lights, he knew one thing for certain: he would honor Eleanor's legacy, not by clinging to the money she had left him, but by making this place a home again, one filled with love, kindness, and the quiet strength that Eleanor had embodied all her life. And as he drifted off to sleep in his new home, Oliver knew that this was only the beginning. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the shadows of the trees stretched long across the land, Oliver returned to the cabin, his cabin. The weight of everything that had transpired over the past few weeks lingered with him, but it was no longer a burden. It was a testament to the bond he had shared with Eleanor and the quiet strength of her belief in him. He stood for a moment on the porch, the air cool and still, looking out over the land. This place, once only a temporary refuge, had become something so much more. It was now a part of him, woven into the fabric of his life, just as much as it had been a part of Eleanor's. The soft rustle of the leaves in the breeze, the distant chirp of crickets, it all felt like an embrace, a reminder of the peace this place had always brought him. Stepping inside, Oliver felt a quiet sense of gratitude fill his chest. The cabin was more than just wood and walls now. It was a symbol of the connection between him and Eleanor, a friendship forged in small acts of kindness, in moments of shared understanding, and in the unwavering trust she had placed in him. Every corner of the house still held her presence, not just in the belongings she had left behind, but in the spirit of generosity she had embodied. As he walked through the quiet rooms, Oliver found himself drawn to the small table in the living room, where a single framed photograph of Eleanor rested. In the photo, she was smiling, her eyes sparkling with the joy that had so often been hidden beneath the weight of her years. Next to the photograph was a candle that Oliver had lit many times in her memory, but tonight, it felt different. With steady hands, Oliver lit the candle once more, the small flame flickering to life, casting a warm, gentle glow across the room. It was a simple act, but to Oliver it felt like a promise to honor the legacy of kindness Eleanor had left behind. The flame danced softly, illuminating the photograph, and for a brief moment, Oliver imagined her sitting beside him again, offering him one of her soft, knowing smiles. As he stood there, the memories of their friendship washed over him, how they had met by chance, the countless afternoons spent sharing coffee and conversation, the way Eleanor had always treated him with dignity and respect when the rest of the world saw him as nothing. She had never asked for anything in return, only offering her time and warmth because that was who she was. She had changed his life, not with grand gestures or material wealth, but with the quiet strength of her belief in him. And now, it was his turn to carry that torch. Oliver moved to the old rocking chair by the window, the one Eleanor had sat in so many times before. As he rocked gently, staring out into the darkening sky, he couldn't help but think of the journey that had brought him here. He had been a man lost, homeless, without purpose, adrift in a world that had long since forgotten him. But Eleanor had seen him. She had reached out to him when no one else had, offering him not just a place to belong, but a chance to rediscover his own worth. It hadn't been the money that had changed him, nor even the cabin itself. It was the kindness. It was the way Eleanor had treated him like a person, with dignity and compassion, when so many others had simply walked by. In a world that had cast him aside, Eleanor had extended her hand, and in doing so, had given him a second chance. As Oliver sat in the stillness of the cabin, the enormity of her gift truly settled in. It wasn't about the inheritance or the legal battles he had fought. It was about something far deeper. The belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple out and change the world in ways unimaginable. Eleanor had shown him that everyone had value, no matter their circumstances. And now it was his turn to continue that legacy. Oliver stood up from the rocking chair, a new sense of purpose filling him. He had once been a man with nothing, but now he had everything he needed. The cabin was his, but more importantly, he had the opportunity to do what Eleanor had always done, to give back, to help others in the same way she had helped him. The thought made his heart swell. This cabin, once a symbol of Eleanor's life, would now become a place of refuge for others. Oliver made a silent vow to himself that he would open its doors to those in need, people like him who had been forgotten by the world. It would be a safe haven, just as it had been for him, a place where people could feel seen, heard, and valued. He imagined the future with a sense of quiet joy. Perhaps he would invite others to stay with him, people who had fallen on hard times, who needed a place to rest and rebuild. Perhaps he would start small, offering meals or a warm bed, but over time, the cabin could become something more. A place where kindness was shared freely, just as Eleanor had shared it with him. As the night deepened, Oliver made his way to the bedroom. For the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. The weight of the past, the years of wandering, the loneliness, the uncertainty, seemed to fall away, leaving only the warmth of Eleanor's legacy. He pulled back the old quilt that Eleanor had cherished, feeling the soft fabric between his fingers. The bed, once a lonely place where he had slept restlessly, now felt like a sanctuary. He slipped beneath the covers and closed his eyes, letting out a long, slow breath. For the first time in what felt like forever, Oliver knew that he belonged. This cabin, this legacy, was his to protect and nurture. And as he drifted off to sleep, he knew, deep in his heart, that he would do everything in his power to honor Eleanor's memory. Eleanor's kindness had transformed Oliver's life, and now he would carry that torch forward, ensuring that her spirit lived on through the lives he would touch. The cabin was no longer just a relic of the past. It was a living, breathing symbol of human connection, of how one person's kindness could change the course of another's life. And as Oliver slept soundly for the first time in years, the candle under Eleanor's photograph continued to flicker gently, its light a beacon of hope, warmth, and the enduring power of love. No one could take that away from him. As Oliver stood on the porch of the cabin, the warm morning sun bathing the land in soft, golden light, he knew that this was more than just the end of a chapter. It was the start of something new, something greater than even he had imagined. Eleanor's gift had not only changed his life, but it had set into motion a legacy that would continue far beyond these walls, a legacy of kindness, trust, and the unwavering belief that even the smallest acts of compassion could ripple out into the world, transforming lives in ways that could never be predicted. For years, Oliver had wandered through life without direction, lost in the shadows of grief and hardship. But now, standing here, the cabin behind him and the future ahead of him, he understood what Eleanor had known all along. That true wealth wasn't found in money or property, but in the connections we make, the people we lift up, and the kindness we share. Oliver wasn't just honoring Eleanor's memory by keeping the cabin. He was honoring her by paying it forward, by continuing the cycle of generosity that had brought him here in the first place. This cabin would become a place of refuge, a beacon of hope for those who, like him, had once felt invisible, forgotten by the world. He closed his eyes and let the moment wash over him, knowing that from here on out, his life would be dedicated to spreading that same kindness Eleanor had shown him. This was his new beginning, but it was also a new beginning for others, those who would come to the cabin seeking shelter, guidance, and a second chance. As Oliver's journey comes to a close, there's a message that echoes far beyond the walls of this cabin, one that resonates deeply with every heart willing to listen. Kindness matters. This story isn't just about a man who was given a second chance. It's about the power of human connection, the strength that comes from trusting in one another, and the profound impact that even the smallest gestures can have. Eleanor's kindness changed Oliver's life, but more than that, it started a chain reaction of goodness that will continue long after this story ends. Each of us has the power to make a difference in someone else's life. It doesn't take grand gestures or wealth to do so. Sometimes, it's as simple as offering a hand when someone is struggling, listening when someone feels unheard, or believing in someone when no one else does. These moments of kindness may seem small, but they can ripple outwards, touching more lives than we'll ever know. Oliver's story is a reminder of this truth, and as his journey continues, we are all invited to take part in that legacy of kindness. The world may sometimes feel cold and indifferent, but together we can create pockets of warmth, places where people feel safe, seen, and valued, just as Eleanor did for Oliver. We hope that Oliver's story has touched your heart and reminded you of the power you hold to change someone else's life. Kindness is a currency that never loses value. It's a gift that can transform not just the receiver, but the giver as well. If this story has inspired you, we encourage you to share it with others. Who in your life could use a moment of kindness, a gesture of trust, or a word of encouragement? If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. It means the world to us. See you in the next video.